What is sustained in a sustainable society is not economic growth or market share or any of these things, but is the web of life on which our survival depends.
Desde que lançou o best-seller O Tal da Física em 1975, o austríaco Fritjof Capra abriu um novo capítulo em sua biografia. Ao relacionar aspectos do Zen oriental com a física quântica, Capra entendeu que o grande desafio da ciência contemporânea era a aceitação da sua não linearidade, a forma como se move a própria teia da vida em diferentes direções. Fritjof Capra esteve no Brasil em 2003, propondo novos paradigmas para a forma de estar no mundo. Em 2012, seu foco está voltado para a questão do modelo de desenvolvimento. Este é o núcleo central do balanço dos últimos 10 anos que o milênio foi buscar com o velho físico e ativista.
Dr. Capra, I had the pleasure to meet you in 2003 in the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre. And at this time, you told me about your option of not having TV, not having cell phone, not having email. You used to play cards with your family during the evenings. I wonder if you keep this way of life, or you have already defeated for the speed of innovation, new technologies.
I had to make some adjustments.
You did.
But I still keep the technology a little bit removed. I still don't watch television, except for tennis, because I'm a tennis fan, and so I watch tennis matches. I don't use a cell phone in the United States. We have one for emergencies, but nobody knows the number. It's just for my wife and myself and the family. And when I travel, I use cell phones because it's very convenient. Email, I still use very little, and I don't give out my email address officially, so it's only for special projects that I use it. So I've made some adjustments, but I still keep a lot of free time for myself to think, to write, and to have a private life.
But at the same time, you seem to be absolutely connected to the world. How do you exchange ideas, or for instance, how do you respond to the enormous number of invitations to give lectures in different countries?
Let me tell you, first of all, that I keep very well informed. So I use the internet extensively.
You do, of course.
So I go to the BBC News website every morning, first thing. And then I go to special websites. There is a website called Common Dreams, which has a selection of progressive articles from around the world. There are various other websites that I can go to where I get information, and I don't get information only through the mass media, but through various channels of NGOs and civil society and sort of my colleagues in the broad sense of the word. And I also read newspapers. I read several newspapers regularly, so I'm generally well informed. And then I'm part of a global network of thinkers and activists, and I keep in touch with them. I meet them occasionally. I think the strength of the civil society is, among other things, that it is not only an electronic network of NGOs, but also a personal network of friendships. So I'm friends, for instance, with Vandana Shiva in India, with Amory Lovins in the United States, with Gunther Pauli in Europe, and the various leaders of this global network who are my personal friends.
By 2003, you were implementing the Center of Ecoliteracy in Berkeley, California, promoting ecology and systems thinking in primary and secondary education. Actually, you are aiming for a non-fragmented thought as a backbone for education. Have you been succeeded?
Yes, I'm very happy to tell you that we had great success. We started in 1994, 95. So by the time we met, we had already worked for 7 or 8 years.
Oh.
And now, you know, this is another 10 years. We have restructured the organization. We worked with schools, with a whole network of schools for about 10 years to develop.
How many schools?
Oh, about 300 schools maybe, to develop a whole pedagogy for teaching ecology and systemic thinking in schools. And once we had developed that and we knew what you could do in schools and what works, we shifted to outreach and communication. So now we do mainly publications and seminars. We still work with some schools and we do some consulting, but the main work is seminars and publications. We published one book which is called Ecological Literacy, and it also has a Brazilian edition with cool tricks, and it's called Alfabetização Ecológica. And a second book just came out in the US and is called Smart by Nature. Our pedagogy not only is based on ecology and on thinking in terms of relationships, in terms of patterns, in terms of context, what we call systemic thinking, it is also an experiential pedagogy. So we take school children out into a garden, out to a beach or to a riverbed, and we teach them ecology in a hands-on way. And so this will be different in different areas because the educational system will be different in different countries, and the climate and the ecosystems are different.
Do you believe that the mainstream science is really opening up to non-reductionist and non-linear ways of thinking?
Yes, absolutely. There has been enormous change in science, and I tell you why. Because scientists have realized that all living systems are non-linear, and that non-linear systems need a different approach and different techniques. And we have
can you give me an example?
Yes.
So I can
yes. Well, one of the
make it clear.
Okay, one of the key discoveries of biology and the systemic approach in the last 30 years has been the discovery that all living systems are networks. So we have food webs in ecosystems. In our body, we have a network of tissues. Each tissue is a network of cells. Each cell is a network of molecules. So the network is the basic pattern of organization of life.
Communities, as you say.
Yeah, well, that's social systems. In social systems, we have communities. In ecosystems, we have ecological communities. Now, if you study a network, the first thing you see is that it goes in all directions. It's not linear. So this is what we mean by nonlinear systems. And in the last 30 years, there has been a big development in science and mathematics to develop a theory of complexity, which is a theory of nonlinear systems, a mathematics to be able to describe these nonlinear systems. And these systems and the methodology to deal with them are inherently non-reductionist. So scientists have gone beyond reductionism in a big way in the last 20, 30 years.
Coming back to the talk we had 10 years ago, you believed that we were coming to a hydrogen economy that would replace the oil economy within 5, 10 years, as you projected. But the truth is that we are still very far from a post-carbon era. How would you redo these projections?
I was wrong in that sense. There was, at the time, there was a great excitement about hydrogen as a new fuel, and it is still a very viable option, but it requires a totally different infrastructure. Because when you drive a car, you cannot go to a filling station. They're called petrol stations, right? Because they sell petrol. They don't have hydrogen. So you'd have to build a whole infrastructure. And I thought that this would happen, but it hasn't happened. And largely it hasn't happened.
Isn't it because of the profits?
Yeah, no, because of the political power of the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry has tremendous political power, and for that reason, the US Senate, for example, has not even discussed a viable climate policy. Not only, you know, they did not pass a law, they didn't even discuss it, because the fossil fuel industry does not allow them to discuss it. The corruption in the political system is so systemic, so inbuilt, that through financial contributions, the fossil fuel industry cuts off all discussion of climate policy. And for the same reason, it has prevented industries from developing hydrogen. However, we must also say, and this is something I did not foresee, that wind energy has made dramatic increases, much more than anybody would have thought. And I don't know whether you heard this, just about a week ago, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel announced that she would invest 200 billion euros in restructuring the German energy industry toward wind and alternative
from nuclear
energy, from nuclear to wind and renewables. Now, what this means is that within a few years, if that works, Germany will be the industry leader in energy. And this will have an enormous impact because other countries will need to follow.
In your recent lecture in Rio, you mentioned the Blue Planet report, which will be presented in the conference Rio +20 in June, next June. I would like to add to this report another one that has just been released from the German Heidelberg Institute of International Research on Conflicts. In just 1 year, 2011, the number of wars and armed conflicts has tripled, and it is the largest, the highest one since 1945. 20 wars and 166 armed conflicts. The same report mentions also a considerable growth of American Special Operation Forces, the so-called SOF, which means that President Obama's administration has intensified the shadow wars in 60% of the nations of the world. Do you believe that we still have reasons to be optimistic?
Well, first of all, we need to recognize that these armed conflicts and these wars are directly related to natural resources and especially energy, and to the fossil fuel policies of the United States. They have a global empire to extract natural resources. And why do they do it? They do it because they believe, with the country's leading economists, that unlimited quantitative growth is a sign of a healthy economy and is absolutely necessary. Whereas just common sense tells you that unlimited growth on a finite planet is impossible. But economists maintain this illusion of quantitative growth that has to go on perpetually. And the Blue Planet laureates also address this in this report for Rio +20. So my solution to this, which I proposed in a paper that I wrote with Hazel Henderson, is to shift from quantitative to qualitative growth. The kind of growth we observe in nature, where some things grow, other things decline and recycle their components, and where growth is also inner growth and maturity and increasing complexity and sophistication. And since this quantitative growth really lies at the bottom of most of our world problems, I think this shift is absolutely necessary.
When you speak about the irrational belief on perpetual growth and predict a clash between the linear thinking in the non-linear web of life, are you talking about the collapse of capitalism, or are you talking about a new form of capitalism? Because capitalism has always been the perpetual accumulation, no?
Yes, but it doesn't have to mean it. No, what capitalism originally means is to use market forces to guide the economy. And there are several concepts, several ideas that have been added to this and that are now sort of understood as part and parcel of capitalism. One is that the idea of unlimited growth. The second one is that this should be sustained by fossil fuels, totally unnecessary. And a third one is that we have constructed a global economy consisting of a network of financial flows, which is extremely efficient in the narrow sense, all computerized, and which has excluded any kind of ethical consideration. It's a totally unethical economy, and it is not necessary, because we could tax unethical behavior or unecological behavior, unsustainable behavior, and we could direct the market forces in a certain direction.
We had a shift in the voices that are in the streets in this 21st century. They are all focusing the financial system.
Yes, absolutely.
How do you see the Occupy Wall Street movement?
First of all, I should say that we now have a new global civil society that was largely formed and organized at these meetings of the World Social Forum where we met in Porto Alegre and then in other parts of the world. So we have a global coalition of NGOs that represents the values that we began to advocate and explore in the 1960s. Now, at the same time, as we coalesced into a global network of thinkers and activists, at the same time, the corporations and businesses also coalesced into a global network, into a global financial network, and into a global economy. So now, I think the latest round of this struggle is that especially young people have become keenly aware of the dominance of the global financial system and are protesting against it. I'm very hopeful in the Occupy movement because they really address the core of the problem, the dominance of the financial sector and the corruption of politics. That needs to be addressed.
Dr. Capra, in these days, the expression sustainability has become a sort of a new brand that has been disputed mostly by transnationals all over the world. The banking sector, the industrial sector, the financial sector, everybody has a department of sustainability, which is the most important piece of their business marketing. Are we talking about a green economy, or are we talking about greenwashing?
Well, largely about greenwashing, and you can notice that in fact most of these companies do not talk about sustainability but about sustainable development, and that was of course the term coined by Brundtland, by the Brundtland Commission in the 1980s, but it's a very difficult term, problematic term, because development as it is understood by economists is growth of GDP, unlimited growth of GDP, which is inherently unsustainable, and as we said before. And so sustainable development in that sense is an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense at all. However, if you use development in the sense used by biologists as an unfolding, a multi-dimensional unfolding of life, of our capacities, not only economic but cultural, spiritual, intellectual, then sustainable development makes sense. So it is true that the word is often misused, and this is why I begin my lectures by explaining that what is sustained in a sustainable society is not economic growth or market share or any of these things, but is the web of life on which our survival depends.
You believe this shift is possible?
Well, it has to happen because we're seeing the disastrous consequences, and more and more people advocate that. And I think this statement of the Blue Planet laureates at Rio Plus 20 is a very important one and will have an effect, because Rio Plus 20 has great visibility. The eyes of the world are on Rio de Janeiro, will be in that week. And so this statement will be very important. So in answer to your question, I do believe that this shift is possible, and it's in fact the only solution I see, because you cannot say we can't have growth. Growth is an essential property of life. An economy or society that doesn't grow will sooner or later die. But growth is not, in nature, is not unlimited and is not linear and only quantitative. It is multidimensional. Some things grow, others decline. And that qualitative growth is something we can and must adopt.
Dr. Capra, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure for me. Thank you.